Stop the cap.
Okay, so I have slept on it. A little bit less emotional than I was the first time I responded. And I'm probably going to have to turn this cancel out this fan noise in the background. But anyway, I'll do that. So going back and listening to Jeremy Carey's anti-white interviews, because there's a bunch of white conservatives, I guess, that are interviewing him about this whole anti-whiteness. And like I said, a lot of the conversation is vague, doesn't really pinpoint or describe anything. But there's one key thing that is pretty consistent in, his interviews, and that is immigration. And listening to him, one of the things that irritates me, and then I think I said this in my other video where I was ranting, which is I like my racism out in the open. I like to know who exactly you are. I don't like polite racism. I don't like David Duke racism. I don't like Richard Spencer racism. I don't like Jared Taylor racism, right? Because the most powerful tool to white supremacy is the denial of its existence. So I like my racism just out in the open, where it can't be denied. It's just flagrant. Flag on the play, right? But he comes with the white nationalist sort of perspective, but in a more tactful way, which is basically this, and this is it's rooted in white entitlement. Like the idea that white people just showed up in America and manifest destiny, and white people built this country somehow magically. It wasn't at the expense of anybody else. They built this country, they established it, and therefore they're entitled to the most. And that's pretty much his position, for the average, white man. White folks, a good portion of them are aware of the class warfare that exists, within, their society. And most of them are comfortable with the idea that there's a white elite and they have billions of dollars and everything. But again, at the end of the day, it should never, whatever's going on in the economy should never affect them having the quote unquote American standard of living. If it affects that, then that's when you start seeing them move into whether it's the Klan, whether it's white nationalist movements. They start taking a more radical approach, this like sort of Project 2025 position, right, where they sprinkle stuff in there. Like I see a lot of people spazzing about the Project 2025, and I think like what's written in the document rings less alarms for me than like what's actually being said in public, which is like the guy that's like the head of the foundation or something like that. He's affiliated with it, helped with the Project 2025. Like they got a clip of him recently talking about, basically the non-violent transition of power versus like the violent overthrow of the government type of thing. And CNN is jumping all over it. TYT is jumping all over it. So I'm more in tune with white people's sentiments and feelings than I am whatever it is that they write on a paper. Because I got white people and their, psychology pegged down to a science. Which basically, is just think, solipsism and the world revolves around me and entitlement, and you're pretty much spot on the money. So in any event, their attitude is their lifestyle should never falter. And so Jeremy's focus is on immigration. And I'm going to touch on the reasons as to why. So, as we talked about before, you had the end of slavery, right? And there was clearly a labor shortage because you didn't have slaves doing the jobs anymore, right? And there was Reconstruction, and then Reconstruction was undermined, right? And then black people were basically thrust back into slavery, but underneath a new name, whether it was debt peonage, whether it was convict leasing, whether it was sharecropping, right? That's what black people over time ended up, vagrancy laws, all this stuff to get black people back in the fields. Okay. And you also got to keep in mind that, again, white people, granted, it's much better than being a slave, but like they were still dealing with labor issues like, working for script and working in these coal mine towns and not being able to unionize, not being able to negotiate for wages, all of these sorts of things. Right. I mean, it was the irony is you have the white elite oppressing the working class whites, and then you have the working class whites oppressing the black people, because the whole reason why, Ocoee, Florida, had their riot was because black people were trying to organize via July Perry. Elaine, Arkansas was burnt down to the ground because black people were trying to organize. You see? So there's this, divide and conquer and maintaining, the hierarchies where white people want to be this buffer class in the middle, that, for African Americans, that's the bane of our existence. That's where we, have a lot of issues, when it comes to racism and white supremacy. But in any event, continuing with the timeline. So you had the end of slavery, then you had the Gilded Age, right? And all the, the era of, the Latimer Massacre, the Ludlow Massacre, the Homestead Massacre. And there was another massacre that starts with a B, that it was in that video, Techno-Feudalism, that I never heard of, and I was going to look it up, but I didn't get a chance to look it up. But there was another like massacre, a labor massacre, where, basically, a bunch of people go on strike, and then, the police show up, and they're like hired guns, like the Pinkertons, and then somebody fires a shot, and then like, it's like a puff of smoke in both directions, and then a bunch of people are laying dead on the ground, and then it hits the newspaper, strikers attack, the police, and what's so crazy is when you look at these articles, like they literally, from the past, they literally do the same thing that the propaganda does the same thing that white media does to black people, right? So like if there's black people that interact with police, they'll be like, Black Lives Matter rioters attack the police, right? Like this is how like Fox News is going to spin it. And when you look at the news articles, and I might do a video where I like show that and break all that down. But if you look at the articles really throw the white people fighting for wages under the bus, right? This sort of class warfare. But anyway, so all the way up until 1924, which I believe the 1924 Immigration Act was also okay, so the 1924 Act was not the Chinese Exclusion Act. That was basically the Act of 1882. So the Act of 1882, I had to double check. So the Act of 1882 basically excluded the Chinese primarily. That's one of the key doctrines of it. And then the Immigration Act of 1924 basically excluded Italians, people from Southern Europe, people from Eastern Europe, and essentially what they wanted Nordic whites. That's what they wanted, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed folks. I don't know what wave. I think they came earlier. A lot of the Norwegian people that are out there in the Midwest, in the Scandinavian people in, the north central part of the United States, like places like Wisconsin and Iowa. And, I think there's a lot of like Norwegian people of Norwegian descent out there, and even Germanic descent. But, so Jeremy's whole thing, even though, the conversation is about anti-whiteness, the way he looks at it is, so you had the Act of 1924, and then you had the Civil Rights Movement after World War II in the 1960s. Then you had the Immigration Act of 1965. And, he's asking the question, why were the floodgates opened? Because the policy was basically that not only did America previously pick and choose who they wanted to let into the country, which namely were Nordic white people, because they wanted to maintain the demographics, but they also, excluded certain groups in particularly, but they only let so many people in the country, in ways so that they could, come in, assimilate, even though I don't believe it has anything to do with assimilation. Yes, sure, they would love, immigrants that act like Vivek Ramaswamy, assimilate, and basically look up to white people and kiss white people's ass. They would love to maintain, that sort of social and racial hierarchy. But I don't even think that's really what the real problem is. Now, the real problem that he has now is the fact that the floodgates have been opened. All these immigrants, come into the country, and they're changing, the cultural demographic, of America, right? Meaning, just demographically, white people are no longer the majority. Like, in other words, even if he recognizes that white people's birth rates are low, his attitude is stop the hemorrhaging. Stop immigrants from coming into the country, prevent them from coming into the country, that way. Because, in other words, white people shouldn't have to adjust and have 5 children like he has 5 children in order to keep the white birth rates up. In other words, that's unreasonable. What he would want is for the borders to be closed. Then, and then, it's not that he doesn't understand, and maybe I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure he covered this in his video, or his interview. But the whole idea is if you close the border, then the corporations don't have anybody to negotiate other than with Americans, namely white Americans, so they would be forced to deal with the higher wages as opposed to lower wages, which is what the goal of immigration primarily is. The goal of immigration in 1965 also had other purposes to it, which was, one, dilute the civil rights movement, because you have to recognize that largely before 1965, it was largely just white people and black people. This is the whole problem with immigration, even for black people, because you see like how that Colombian, whoever politician that's running for office has the audacity, bitch, you just got here yesterday, and she gonna get up there and talk about no reparations for black people, and if you don't like this country, you can get the fuck out. Like, bitch, who the fuck is you, right? Right? You haven't paid your dues. You haven't sacrificed. You haven't shed blood. You literally just got here and you're talking shit with an accent. Those are the type of immigrants that white people want, even though they don't particularly care for Latinos and their spicy food and the smells and the music and and all that. They don't care for that. They do want those people to assimilate, but they want their population to be at manageable levels to where white people still, are the majority of population, and it is, things are defined and set up, by white people, and they don't feel overwhelmed, and they don't feel like they have to be, locked away in their little small communities, where they're essentially isolated. They're isolated, living in their all white enclaves, because in America, the way that real estate has been set up, the more prestigious a neighborhood is based off of how exclusively white it is. This is how they have set up the system. So the other reason why they wanted to bring in the immigrants, aside from, watering down the civil rights movement, right? Because you don't want any demographic to, become too big. And if you have other people coming into the country, that, obviously don't have any history tied to the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow in America, when the conversation is put, oh, you owe, black people for reparations for slavery with your tax dollars, even though this is money that's coming from the federal government, because the federal government sanctions slavery and the banks sanctioned, slavery and made money off of slavery and had, insurances on slaves and all these sorts of, the whole stock market, there's a whole slave stock market. All of that is sitting in, the federal treasury. And so, but they want to frame it as, oh, the guy that just got here from India, your tax dollars are going to paying for these lazy African Americans that we promote as such in our media. Your tax dollars are going to, pay for them, and you didn't do anything to owe black people any slaves. Just like that, what is she, Mexican woman that stood up in front of, I don't know if it was California, and she was, bitching about what she doesn't owe, that sort of thing. See, that's what happens when you bring in the immigrants to, essentially a fight, which is between black people and white people, that they had no part of. That's how they feel about the shit. And white people know that. So they're like, bring them on in for that reason. That's another nefarious reason as to why they want to, bring in the immigrants. Jeremy Carey seems to thinks it's a right or a left thing, which I disagree with. And there's enough supporting evidence to just support that, because even the Koch brothers are, I know one of them died, but even, they're pro-immigration, because again, it ties back to that whole cheap labor. The biggest cost in any sort of production is cheap labor. And again, looking at Peter Zeihan's recent video, he's talking about how, basically we're going into deglobalization. And so basically the manufacturing is going to have to be built out here in America, and it's going to take massive amounts of transformation to the infrastructure, the energy grid. I mean, hell, even the stuff with the AI, that consumes massive amounts of energy. Things have to be produced here. Microchips, what's the TMC, whatever it is, that company out there in Taiwan, they got to, you're sitting right there on the doorstep of China. They can't have that. Right, that's a risk to national security. So they got to bring all that stuff back, right? So there will be an explosion, of jobs. I don't know how great or tremendous it'll be, but the whole concept is, okay, well, we need the immigrants to come in, as cheap labor, right? So they're bringing in the immigrants. The door will probably be shut pretty soon, but they've already brought in a significant wave, for, those lower jobs, at the bottom rung of society, right? So the other reason that they had the immigration in 1965 is because 1965 was in the middle of the Cold War. And many of the countries were actually gaining their independence in the 1960s. Many African countries gained their independence in the 1960s, and they were going through transitions after World War II, because you had two superpowers. You had Russia, and then you had the United States. You had communism, and you had democracy. And America wanted to appear that it was this democratic, egalitarian society, and it was so wonderful, and it was colorblind, and it was racist. And so they opened the floodgates, for that, because if you had people who were in America and they were from different countries and people had ties and connections to America, that was good for the propaganda of America. That was good, America's not so bad because I have cousins in America. I have relatives in America, right? And so there was a political motivation for when it came to the immigration, to make America not a homogenous society, because America wasn't America's rule over the rest of the world wasn't going to be, a homogenous rule. It was going to be a rule that involved, Cambodians and Thai and Vietnamese and Africans and people from Kenya and Botswana and Nigeria and, Argentina and freaking Venezuela and Costa Rica and, Turkmenistan and Azerbaijan and, right, all these different places, right? They needed people to be pro-American and anti-communist. You see? America is great. America is wonderful. I have cousins in America. They live in America. I visit America all the time, blah, 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 blah. Right? And so that was one reason. They opened the floodgates for immigration. But then there was another issue, which was at that time, even though the 1924 immigration basically wanted to bring in a whole bunch of Nordics and Norwegian people and whatnot, the communist nations basically closed the door in Europe, because remember, Europe was split. You had West Europe, and then you had the Iron Curtain. And so immigrants from those regions of the country were no longer able to basically leave their country. Russia basically closed the door and was like, nah, y'all bitches can't leave. The Balkans and all that, they couldn't leave. So that left basically a lot of the non-white regions in the world to end up being the ones that were, doing the immigration into America. So these are the factors. So what Jeremy Carey is seeing is there's this demographic shift, and now, basically because of all the actions that white people have done around the world globally with their imperialistic empire, they're catching all type of smoke. Okay, and he feels that anti-whiteness is rampant, and there needs to be something that's done about it. And then obviously that rolls into the Project 2025, and and basically rebuilding the whole establishment of the traditional white America. When it comes to the economic part, and I have to admit, this is kind of smart, because basically the whole thing is like, the attitude is white people shouldn't have to produce, like, he has 5 children, right? White people shouldn't have to produce 5 children in order to keep up with the immigrants. Just close off the immigrants, and then, we can normalize white people's birth rates. White people's birth rates become less of an issue once you stave off, you close out, the immigrant population, who tends to procreate like rabbits, right? Any poor group tends to procreate like rabbits. White people, on the other hand, and Asians, on the other hand, they tend to focus more on lifestyle. They want to live a particular lifestyle. And when you're trying to live a particular lifestyle, a high income lifestyle, kids cut into that. You can't get that Mercedes Benz now. Now you can't get that coupe. Now you got to go and you got to get the minivan. No coupes for you, right? You can't go on those trips or go on those vacations, right? Because now you got kids, you have responsibilities, you have ballet, you have piano lessons, you have hockey, you have all this shit that you got to pay for, college tuition, right? Vehicles for your 16-year-old daughter, right? All this shit, right? Cuts into lifestyles. So again, white people want to be able to maintain their lifestyle, which means only having, 1 or 2 children, 3 maximum. Okay, 3 maximum. So the only way that you can counter what the immigrants are doing with the flood of immigrants coming in is to close the borders. Okay, then what this also addresses, it addresses the wage issue, because without the immigrants coming in, the wages are now driven up and they're not driven down. Okay, because that's one way to stave it off without having to get into those nasty negotiations where the corporations have the leverage, because they're like, hey, I got this flood of people that I can just, I can get them to do the job for cheaper. So what do I need you for? Right? I don't need to pay you $35 an hour. They're doing it for $15. You see? So that's an issue. And, that's one of, his focuses. What else? What is any other reasons of what's, one of the points that he's making? Yeah, like it's at the end of the day, it's like white solipsism. The world revolves around them. They have this entitlement that, we founded this country, we built it at the expense of no one else, which is historical, and whatever it is we took, it's ours, and that's all there is to it, right? Again, like I told you, white people believe in generational wealth. They do not believe in generational debt. They do not believe, in that that anything that the transgressions of their ancestors is anything that they have to, pay for. And these will be the same people that'll be sitting there telling you about how Jesus died for all of mankind's sins. These will be the same people trying to tell you about righteousness and justice and Jesus and splashing holy water all over the place. These will be the same people, that are like, basically, what's mine's is mine's, and what's yours is mine's. Right? Like, he brought that up about, these other people, they want our stuff. I'm like, how is it your stuff when you literally took it? I mean, and again, this goes into, Tim Dillon's whole invade the world, invite the world. You know what I mean? Like the whole reason the rest of the world is the way that it is because of American imperialism and because of not allowing these other nations to naturalize their resources and be the ones that control those sectors of the market. They go in there, they disrupt these countries, they undermine these countries. Like, the amount of evil that America facilitates around the world is insane. The destabilizing force that is America is insane. But yet white people literally stand there, and act like not only is America this exceptional place, but they try to view it through this lens that they are somehow moral and just and these morally superior beings, and that America is just the pinnacle of righteousness and justice, completely ignoring, what the so-called jackals and what the corporations actually go out there and do, right? And how they disrupt, and all the pain and suffering and all the starving that you see. And then you'll have these commercials that come on, at 2:00 in the morning, talking about, for just $1, you can feed this starving, African child. For just $1, you can help this poor child in India get clean water. When the whole reason they don't have clean water, with the whole reason they're starving, is because of Western interest and corporate imperialism. Like, it's nuts. The way that white people actually look themselves. That's why I got to sit up. The way that they look themselves in the mirror and say to themselves, not only am I a good person, but my race are good people. My race is wonderful. My race is everybody should aspire to be like us. I don't know how they do that. I do not know how they do that. How they get up in the morning, you see all this, oh, it's okay to be white. I don't know. Like, what are you proud of? That's my question to white people. Like, were you proud of all the rape, pillage, and plunder? Right? What are you proud of? And then they'll sit there and they'll act like, oh, well, this is just a natural part of natural. Look, you can't have it both ways. Either it's the world, America, planet Earth is a bunch of, Sith lords running around with red lightsabers, and they're just looking to, freaking one up the next guy, right? Like on some, Highlander, there can be only one, or you guys are running around talking about the light of Christ and Jesus and the buttery goodness of the Lord and how righteous and just, Western civilization, should be based on Christianity. Like, it's extremely contradictory. It's extremely contradictory. Where you got like open cobalt mines on one side, with children in there and kids losing their hands and limbs and fingers and shit like that. And, and then on the other side, you have the white family in the suburbs, trying to, go to church on Sunday. And it's like, you do realize that your whole existence, your whole lifestyle, mine included, because I'm sitting over here in America, making this video on my cell phone that probably has, cobalt and nickel and gold and platinum in it, that's used for the electronics to even make this video. You know what I mean? But I don't know how people reconcile with that. Or is it just so many degrees of separation that you don't even have to think about it? It's fairly, disgusting when you think about it. When you think about all the suffering that's going on, elsewhere in the world. And then, the corporations, it's just like, in my opinion, it's like the whole shit is broken. The corporations are basically like the feudal lords. They throw money, and the CEOs and shit like that, they throw money at the politicians. So we don't live in a democracy. We live in a plutocracy, a kleptocracy, oligarchic, society, right? They fund everything. You see all this shit with donors and Joe Biden and we don't know, and we're going to pull our money and all this other stuff, right? Same thing with the little hats and, we don't have any power, but yet, protesting, Israel, and next thing you know, you got, all these little hats out of nowhere pulling billions of dollars out of the universe. Like, I'm like, damn, you just had billions of dollars to just give away and donate to a school, but y'all ain't got no power. Like, fuck out of here. You know what I'm saying? Like, so when you look at how the shit is actually run, it's like you got white Americans that they only think about like their little narrow existence, their like day-to-day lives, right? Which you kind of expect from people. But then you got like that bigger picture of just like pure evil that's being done out there in the world. And then they act like they're surprised that any of this shit is affecting them. Like none of this should affect them. When again, even their own corporations within their own country are not on their side. They're not on their side. They're literally trying to drive down wages. They're not sitting there saying, oh no, we got to have a strong, Judeo-Christian America and make sure that young white men can support families and all that. Right? They're not doing any of that shit. Right? They're looking for out for the interest of the company and the corporation. It goes back to what I said in my previous video. They don't care. They don't care about your whiteness. They don't care about your white family. They don't care. And what Jeremy does, and then what the conservatives do, they try to make it a right-left issue. And I'm like, if you think that there aren't Democrats that aren't catering to corporations, like where does you think all that money comes from? That money is not coming from, just a bunch of rich gay dudes sitting in a room around a table talking about, yeah, Joe Biden, you better not. Like, no. Like that money is coming from major donors, major corporations. Hell, half the time you'll have these companies, they support both sides because they want to maintain and keep the support of a two-party system where you don't really have a choice. It's like, this guy or this guy, it's at the end of the day, it's going to be the same shit. Because the people who really run shit are behind the scenes. They're the corporations, right? They're the banks, right? They're people who hold the money, people who hold global capital. Larry Fink runs this country, and freaking Jamie Dimon. Those two individuals alone run this country more than Joe Biden or Donald Trump ever could. But you all don't seem to be able to wrap your heads around that. But I get it. This book is just addressing, this sort of idea of this sort of identity in the ruling class that doesn't really exist anymore. Those guys have gone global. They're looking at it from a global standpoint. Now, granted, you have the de-globalization that's going on because, again, China's not a reliable, freaking business partner. Right? Because China, the dictators are beautiful because you don't have to deal with the politics. You don't have to, you can, if the dictator is in your pocket, it's like, bam, fast track to whatever the fuck it is I want. I don't want your resources to be naturalized. I want them to be given to the private sector. We're going to cut you some checks, but then we're going to take these resources and we're going to, basically facilitate Western civilization with these resources and enrich ourselves in the process, right? That's what they do. But when it comes to, like having democracies, the benefit of the democracies is that politicians can always be bought or have money thrown against them unless the unless the what do you want to call it? Unless there's laws against it, or the country itself is hostile, against the U.S. But typically, if you look at it, what countries does the U.S. have the most beef with? Russia, which is essentially a dictatorship because you got Putin up there with the Siloviki, and but Russia's kind of like run like a mob, right? Oh, I won the election, right? Then you got China, right? Xi Jinping, basically dictator for life, right? Then you got North Korea, you got Kim Jong Il, right? Or Kim Jong Un, right? Is it Kim Jong Un or Kim Jong? Kim Jong Un, right? Yeah. Anyway, I think one is his father. But anyway, dictator, right? Dictators are cool as long as they're on your side. Dictators are bad because if they get the hair in the crack of their ass, they can shut down everything that you do, right? It's just like how, Buick was in China. I think Buick and Jeep were in China. And basically all China did was basically run campaigns against them, anti-American. And then they got their own, electric cars, BYD, all that stuff. And they basically ran all the American manufacturers out of China. Buick used to be the shit back in the day in China. They thought Buick was like the bee's knees. You got Mao Zedong, he waving from a Buick and shit like that. Buick was like the vehicle in China forever. And Buick is like nobody now in China. You know what I mean? So again, that the whole fighting over Taiwan, it's like looking at it now, they're like, well, maybe this wasn't such a good idea. I mean, we went over there to basically undercut American wages because we damn sure didn't want to pay Americans American wages. We want to make these products cheap as possible and then bring them back into the country via NAFTA, tariff free, right? That's what we want to do, right? We'll piece it together in Mexico and then we'll bring it back over the border, duty free, right? And that's what they wanted to do. But now with all this volatility in the world, and then you got North Korea, Russia, and China forming Voltron, and then you got BRICS, right? And then you got Saudi Arabia dropping the petrodollar, right? It's like, now there's a whole bunch of restructuring is going on. But seriously speaking, like I said in my last video, America is the motherfucking empire. It is the empire. It is the imperial galactic empire, and that's just what it is. So I feel like Jeremy has like this old school mentality. I mean, don't get me wrong, what he's saying is racist. I'm just breaking down the mechanics of how he's thinking, right? Because he's like, well, America's a majority, and white people are a majority, and we need to maintain this, we need to get all this under control. The corporations don't give a fuck. Corporations are like, whatever's going to give me the most money. Hell, now, having Africa be developed, it is a net positive, in terms of, that's more markets. Now they finally have money to spend with us. Oh, let's start doing some advertising over there. So it's like they want more. They always want more markets. It's like if the place can't be exploited for resources, then it becomes developed. It's like, okay, well, we want more markets. Okay, now those people got money. Okay, well, we want that too. And what white people are trying to preserve and maintain is not in the cards of that. And I don't think he realizes that, nor do I think he particularly cares. This is just the opinion of a white man with white nationalist, tendencies, and, the idea that the general makeup of America should be majority white, and it should always be that way. And white people should always be able to maintain, or at least the majority of white people should be able to maintain a upper middle class lifestyle, and they should be able to only have about 2 to 3 kids. They shouldn't have to be forced to have more because we're closing the border. And the corporation should have to deal with them, and the corporation should be paying white Americans decent wages. And, that's how it should be. And whatever else is going on in the rest of the world, we don't really care, right? This is the attitude. We don't really care. As long as we get to, live our upper middle class lifestyle, send our kids to college, retire comfortably, drive decent automobiles, live in a safe suburban neighborhood, go on vacations a couple times a year, and be able to leave something behind, for our kids. That's pretty much, what people like Jeremy want. That's what they want. And be able to set the tone and set the pace and them as white people allocate opportunities to everybody else, right? To allocate, what everybody else will be doing. You see, and that's where and how they maintain power. So I'm just sharing, giving a further breakdown of some of the things that I, picked up on, after I went back, listened to more videos from him, and, let, conversations I had with Captain Solo, after watching the videos and just thinking about, what I said in my first video and what I'm saying now, after sleeping on it. Because I was like, nah, okay, I see what this motherfucker is trying to do. Because Cap, he picked up on the immigration part right away. Because he's like, nah, this is how they are. You know what I mean? He's like, nah, they this goes back to the Ghost of White People Past article. It's 100% goes to white people past. Everything that he's saying, the immigration, all that, there's too many of you all. Yeah, that's goes to white people past talk all day. But I'm just adding, the bigger picture to it. But anyway, that's all I got to say. That's my video. SWP out. Don't forget to comment, share, like, and subscribe.